Welcome, everyone. I'm Martha Stewart, and this is my Holy Family Church, which I just told someone, I think I've told you all before, but when I was a child, the church I went to in Nutley, New Jersey was Holy Family Catholic Church. And then I come up to Skylands and I own Holy Family Church. God must love me. But I'm very, very happy to introduce Scott Konieco, who has brought us yet another fantastic speaker and celebrating the Beatrix Farrand Society. And we're very pleased to be able to offer this nice, cool spot in which to hear famous people talk. And we have a very famous speaker today who happens to be also very funny. And I think I gave him too much ice water. But yeah, Robin Lane Fox is our speaker today and hails from London. And are you happy, Robin? Yeah. Oh, good. Scott? Okay. Are you going to speak or not? Yeah, I'm going to introduce you. Don't press any of those buttons, otherwise we're real problems.
I'll keep my hands back here. Okay, well, yeah, it's a real pleasure to see you all here, especially so many faces that are familiar and so many people that have been friends of Beatrix Farrand Society for really a long time. Much appreciated. So I would like to first thank Julie Leisenring, because it was Julie's idea to have this award. And she has not only thought of it, she sponsors it, and she has actually, and mentors it really. So Julie, thank you. And Adam Greenspan, there you are. Yes, so we're about to have the 7th Beatrix Farrand Society Achievement Award recipient, but we also have a previous Beatrix Farrand Society Award recipient, and it's Alan Greenspan. So Adam is, it's just since, I mean, when he was here before, he had already done Glenstone. And now I had the privilege this spring of going to his studio in Berkeley, and the new projects he's doing are, I mean, it's just amazing. And it's a privilege to have you here, Adam. Okay. And now it's also a privilege to introduce Robin Lane Fox. And I think you all probably know him. I mean, it's brought you here. But he is one of the great scholars, a classicist of our time, and also one of the great gardeners of our time. It's a nice combination, I think you'll find. And so he will come, he's a professor at Oxford, as well as the curator of the New Garden, and he is going to be talking about both. So welcome, Robin.
Thank you all so much. The most important question is, I speak upper class English, and I'm speaking into a microphone. Can you hear me at the back if I continue like this? All okay? Right, wonderful. Well, technology and I are not friends, so you can be sure for some surprises. But here we go. I'm enormously grateful to Scott and to Martha Stewart for allowing us to use, I believe I'm saying it, the church she owns. What a wonderful thing. And also to be with all of you. I think I can say I am unique in one respect. I have written a weekly gardening column for the major newspaper, the Financial Times, but I've written it every week for 53 years. Oh. And I try not to repeat myself. I won't write about witch hazels because I remember writing about them in January 1970. I do have strong recall. And I'd just like you all to join me in remembering one of my female readers in New York who has a country house, very nice in Vermont, and sent me an email saying, "Dear Robin, I'm so sorry. I cannot be with you for the talk on Mount Desert. Since my husband died, I have literally buried myself in the garden. I think we all very much have our minds with her. And of course, I think of the very sharp contrast between me and my university life and our iconic Beatrix Farrand. I quote, "A chauffeur-driven open luxury car with the top down gave her a clear view of the campus. She dressed in tailored tweeds with a broad-brimmed hat and carried her umbrella, mostly used as a walking stick." If you could see my car, known by the students as the Silver Bullet, yes, once it tasted blood, which comes into flower really in the spring. I very seldom clean it. And if you could see my apology for the tailored tweeds, you would realize the vast abyss that separates me and my now current heroine, Beatrix Farrand. But I have to begin, I think, in all fairness, by giving an impression of two of our gardens. So I have put on screen a shot this week of part of my country garden, what I call the Killing Fields. The Killing Fields looking across what was an archery lawn laid out for the vicar of the village in 1896 by a great English architect. I didn't know when I bought the house, there was no garden when I came there, Sir Thomas Jackson. And he liked to hold archery contests on the lawn. When I arrived, as the way with English villages, a very, very old lady, he lived till he was 1930, came to me and said, the vicar wasn't really what you think, those archery contests. He just worked out that the young ladies would have to stand sideways with him watching and pull the bow back. And in those days, you should have seen my breasts. Well, we don't engage anymore in that, but I am an immense lover of the small hardy plant, the area where my life, work lives and always will, the unthreatened alpines of our life. That's a little view across the front beds where the alpines are all at their best. And my border, which I've got specially to horrify our distinguished Martha Stewart's sense of color. At the moment, New College Garden is my second garden, which I run and which I'll be talking about, which I know for reasons that will become clear, not as the killing fields, but as the kissing fields. Right, so, unusual view of something famous, Martha Stewart's amazing design for the rose garden in the New York Botanical Garden, so brilliantly restored and at its best since I first saw it in miserable state 30 years ago, taken by drone from above. How can we possibly compete with that? It really looks like one of her drawn plans come true. But compete with it, somehow we are going to have to do. My aim on the whole is informal formality, I say. Informal planting and arrangement of color within a formal frame. And my life is partly in my home garden, the old vicarage with the archery lawn, but primarily too in New College, Oxford, where I've been since 1977. And there I have a particular role. I am the Garden Fellow of the college since 1980. And when I thought, what should I talk to you about? I came to realize that actually Beatrix Farrand and I, in our different ways, have followed, importantly, in one side of her career, a similar path. And I would like to quote what she wrote to a friend. If you feel you have a plantsman companion with you as you walk between the camellias, it is I who are there always beside you, interested in their growth, in their astonished at their size, and marveling at their beauty. And one of the themes of this talk is I had never done any work on the topic of Beatrix Farrand, but in our small way, in one tiny corner of her vastly greater life than mine, in a strange way, we have been moving in parallel. Because, of course, Beatrix tells us herself that she comes from 5 generations of great garden lovers. So do I. I could show you a picture which hasn't worked of the big Lane Fox 18th century garden in Yorkshire with the very famous huge long formal alley designs, well worth seeing, at Bramham Park, Yorkshire, where my father was brought up and would have inherited, but for the deviousness of my great uncle. And thank goodness we'd have been marooned forever in a vast great park with very few flowers, the finest formal garden, by the way, in Britain, built by Robert Benson, Queen Anne's Chancellor of the Exchequer, who made a fortune by selling out in time from the South Sea bubble. Would it be insider trading today? I don't know, but in those days, he drove his carriage proudly down Piccadilly, and that day the South Sea bubble burst, and the passers-by threw rocks at the carriage. So Benson withdrew to Yorkshire and laid out a garden into which my family married his daughter and has always been ours for the next 200 years. Now, I have been a garden fellow in a university. Collegiate Gardening is the title of the great book recently written by Judy's Lerner on Beatrix Farrand. And I find, of course, that she was the first landscape garden consultant to Princeton, then to Yale, then to Vassar, etc., etc. Smaller colleges in California, all very good, which I don't know. Chicago, I had no idea when I worked in the Oriental Institute. There, the inner courtyard and the area around the Oriental Institute. Yes, this is also ultimately Beatrix's design. And she also passed judgment on what she was doing, as I will quote. And in England, she came and she laid out importantly the bones of the garden for Dartington Hall. And I haven't even yet mentioned Dumbarton Oaks. So one side of her commissions, far too big for even a humble being like me to match or equal, overlaps with my job in the same kissing fields for the past 40 years, where she says, the training of the young in daily settings, both beautiful and fit, is a large part of education, as is the regular academic routine. So she wrote to Yale in 1925. Well, when you write polite letters to your employers, you write in general uplift, and that's a sentence of general uplift, down at grass level and at ground level. Unlike, I think, Beatrix Farrand, I actually live both with the professors who received the letter in my college, all my fellow fellows, and also with the limitless ability of the undergraduates to surprise me. Well, more of that in a minute. It's a garden with a very strong sense of history. Just remember this picture, a map of 1730 of the central garden mound of New College, looking like a ziggurat. Look at it. Staircase up, the 4 beds with the royal motto, and all of it of uncertain history. Look at all the trees planted round about. That is a historic image in Oxonia de Picta from 1732. A rather more dreamy picture a little bit later, and Beatrix would not really approve of the number of shrubs that are growing against the buildings, something she never took very kindly to. And again, in 1820, here is that crucial figure, the gardener with the roller, the young doing nothing very much in particular. And at this stage, they are, of course, all men. Some of you may have seen, possibly not, the opening scenes of the film Mamma Mia 2. I enabled them. I did the flower arrangement. And when Lily James cuts loose, thank you so much, Scott, it's exactly what I need. When Lily James cuts loose and sings When I Kissed the Teacher, she had indeed had a private session with me before, and at the end of it, after a strong gin and tonic, thanking me for what I had done to arrange the hall the next day, she went and flung her arms around me. I knew nothing of the song, and said, When I Kissed the Teacher. But there is an immediate error in the song. It says New College, Oxford, 1979, and she's meant to be at Meryl Streep, graduating as the young Donna. There were no women in New College. They were just arriving in autumn 1979. This is a recent, I take this out of order, this is a recent introduction by me, very popular. I had no idea with Beatrix Farrand were espalier trees. And I will take you privately, please, through the thinking behind this particular one. The picture has been very heavily censored because I know how sensitive American scruples can be. The espaliers are a really unusual Malus transitoria, and we keep them clipped because the fellows on the asphalt, they all park their cars along the edge. And I see the elderly professors of enormous distinction, including in those days, the very man who, hang on, I'll get back, really pioneered the atom bomb, not Oppenheimer, who of course helped it to be made, Rudy Piles. I could see him trying to put his key in the car, always looking at what was going on the grass. And what was going on the grass? Well, you know, we are living in the 21st century. And yes, on hot sunny days, there would be young ladies at best wearing underpants. So this struck a memory in my mind. And in Paris at an exhibition of the work of Artemisia Gentileschi, I saw a picture of that biblical story, Susanna and the elders, where the elders are trying to spy on the naked Susanna. And this went into my mind. I went down in France to a great villa in Provence, and they had espalier beech trees. Beatrix Farrand liked espalier forsythia. And I suddenly had a moment, a eureka moment. We need to frame the view of our Susannas lying on the grass, and they will be green windows through which the elders will fiddle with their car keys and needn't feel quite so furtive about what they're doing. And they're coming on really very well. So that is the sort of level of slow thinking that leads to improvement in collegiate gardening. And then this is the mound nowadays. I'll come back to the problems of the mound. That raises questions which I intend to pursue over historic gardening. And I'll wait for that one. Right. So how does it work? Beatrix was the sole garden landscape consultant for Princeton, for Yale, for Vassar, for Chicago, etc., etc. What an amazing job. She commanded teams of men. She actually started nurseries. I couldn't possibly do that. Inside the colleges, she planted in terms of thousands of plants. What a fantastic performance. Very impressive. In Oxford, there are 24 colleges, and each one has a garden fellow who is a tutor in chemistry or psychology or whatever, appointed by their colleagues. And he's surrounded by a committee, God help us, which is supposed to meet. And underneath, there will be the head gardener who has had some kind of training, often rather erratic, who will actually do the day-to-day work, frequently with a staff of 4. So it's rather a different world. In my life, I began gardening at the age of 10. I was really serious by the age of 12. I'm the only person who will ever speak to you, because there is no one else, who went to the great school, Eton College, and whatever you read about Eton, hear it from me, I had a superb intellectual education, nothing to do with Boris Johnson. I was older. And I promptly left and went. You read so much in the papers now about Etonians thinking they are privileged and they are to command the world. Nonsense. I became an under gardener in the Alpinum, or Department of Alpine Plants, in the superb Munich Botanic Garden at the time, where I joined a staff of 78. And it had been tough at Eton, it was even tougher in Munich. Except on holidays, work began at 6:45 in the morning. On holidays, the holiday began at 5:30. That was the group outing. I did that instead of doing a doctorate. So I was an unusual appointment, having written on Alexander the Great, and I was appointed to teach ancient history. When I was appointed to teach ancient history, the German tutor said to me with that backhanded compliments in which Oxford specialized, well, I think we appointed you because when classics dies, as it soon will, this is 1977, at least you can run the garden. I'm pleased to say that actually the subject that's nearly dead is German, and we've never been in stronger form. But being a garden fellow once raises the spectre of garden history. And I would like to emphasize how garden history is very poorly documented. You can read many very well-meaning and very carefully done books on garden history. They'll tell you a bit about plans, a bit about accounts, a little bit about exchanges of letters. But just as you read, ask yourself two questions. Why is this book so boring? And also, why is so much missing? And the reason is that the brilliant researchers are following the documents. But as you well know, and as I've taken great care to ensure, the documents will by no means give a full account of my life. Could I just say to you that if you've ever sent love letters, be at least reasonably encouraged under British law, even though she has received them and treasured them, the love letters still, by copyright, belong to you. I didn't discover that, but I discovered it with another estate I had to administer. Very useful fact. So when you take over as a garden fellow, what do? If you are inadequate, you do one of two things. You pull out what is there before because you don't know what to do. I see this the whole time. It deeply upsets me. And then you wonder what next. You then send for the person who designed a ghastly garden at Chelsea Flower Show. You pay them too much money and the place looks like a tart's dream. Awful. Or you make a long, detailed study of the history of the garden, and you give an after-dinner presentation to all your other colleagues who think, oh, history, yes, we must be true to that. It's very good, we've arrived here, and of course, the new college was made in 1379, and you end up with a completely mendacious view of what might have been the historical reality, and also, it's not the historical garden. Just a serious point we all know. If you are going to try to lay out a historic garden, yes, but to what point of history do you go back? Very important. I look at it so often with designs that have been around for 500-600 years, and I feel they fastened on a point where there was a print. Do we know the print was accurate? Often people exaggerate. That one of the mound I show you, how boring too in this setting. They didn't have all the lovely plants we have now. So you are isolating, trying to fix a point in what is a constant moving stream of evolution. And my mantra in the college gardens has been sympathetic evolution. Don't think you are redoing this, restoring, reintroducing, or even, God help us, the stupidest word in Britain. I don't think you're worried with it too much yet in the States. Rewilding. Yeah, what nonsense. I mean, you go back to a mess of weeds. We don't know weeds existed in 10,000 BC. It absolutely is not, I think, the way we're going to do it. So you might hire somebody to draw a plan. And here again, nobody drew more beautiful plans than Beatrix Farrand. And of course, on a completely bare site, you have to have some kind of plan. And Beatrix was a professional of the highest order, and I know she'd understand what I'm about to say. She would draw plans that place beautifully every single little plant, lovely little groups of them here. You look even now at the revered Peter Rudolph. What am I looking at? Some massive thousands of plants that Peter's got all arranged, sort of anally retentive work on the computer. What is all this crap? I know very, very well that plans do not stand still. Look, we're all old enough if I use a slightly improper word. One of the greatest gardeners I've ever met is Helen Dillon, now slipping alas a little, in Dublin in Ireland. And I knew she was great because I was in the bath in a hotel, too nervous to ring her up. I'd never met her. And I saw her on Irish television. Her garden at its height ranks as the greatest small garden I will ever see, including heaven. And the Irish producer, the Irish were just getting into gardening. It was about 1997, I think, said, Miss Dillon, there are many people now in Dublin who offer to draw plans, landscape designers. What do you think of plans? And unblinking Helen looked at the camera and said, bugger plans. There is a lot of truth in that. Of course, you need ground plans. And of course, I'm aware that what I garden in is mostly dictated by the historic shape and layout of previous gardening. But an absolutely crucial point about gardening, is actual planting is a process. It's a lifelong calling and undertaking, of course, Beatrix Farrand marvelously exemplified. She would go back more than 20 years regularly to every garden she's laid out. This has become much rarer, too rarer. And that's the point of my title, how one thing leads to another. Suddenly something grows really, really well. And then you think, oh, I could match it with that. Or you see something awful in somebody else's garden, and you suddenly think, if it were me, I would have put that. And then you think, oh, why don't I put that against what's growing well? And so it goes on. Or somebody makes a comment, or they take a photograph. Again, we are tyrannized, though we like looking at them, by the separate art, garden photography. Whenever you look at a garden photograph, you feel so undermined. You think, oh my God, you know, I've done nothing like that. They're all lies. They're freezing a moment of carefully chosen perfection at usually 6 in the morning or 7:30 at night, chosen to be, as they are, brilliant photographs. So I am very, very wary and regret too the impact that garden photography is often having on new gardeners. You'll never get it to look like that because it doesn't in real life. But as I think we all know as people, what photographs can do is give you the most awful jolt when you realize to your horror that you have been living with something hideous. I had a large clump of tall orange rudbeckia. It's not difficult to grow. You see quite a bit of it here. Actually, it's the yellowy one, Herbsthorn. It's very pretty. And I had a very stylish Parisian to stay. She was extremely nice. And actually, she was so nice that I rather hope she might stay longer. She lived in the heart of the Septième, the 7th in Paris. So after 5 days, I said to her rather hopefully, would it ever be possible, X, I will be tactful, perhaps for you to think of living somewhere else? And she said, oh yes, Robin, of course. And I thought, this is wonderful. She might come and live with me. And what she said was, in French, I could always consider the 7th. She was not leaving Paris. But before she left, she took a beautiful picture, so she said, of my garden and sent it to me with thanks, saying, see you in the 7th, Isabel. And my heart sank. I thought, my God, how have I lived with this awful thing for the last 4 years? And thanks to the photo, I realized how awful my mistake was. I think we all know this about our hair when we look at it in photos. Certainly mine, it can look absolutely appalling. So one thing can be a photo leads to another. Planning doesn't really work beyond, of course, terrace, ground plan and shape, which are absolutely crucial really to get right. Now I would like to try to illustrate this, wondering exactly what's going to come up. I'm going to go back. Oh, sorry. No, they're coming, don't you worry. There you are. Here's the long border in New Cottage, a bit woolly at the time. The buttresses are of Pittosporum. Just took a picture before I left. We're getting overrun with the Japanese anemone, the pink and volucrata Bethelii, and so on. I have two views. One I learned working for films with Hollywood. If you've got a long length, repeat something, it doesn't show well at this time of the year, down the border, it leads your eye down in groups right to the end, like a zoom lens. Very good tip. You won't find that in Miss Jekyll. And the second thing I learned from my inimitable style icon, the Anglo-American Nancy Lancaster from Virginia, really, I think one of the most brilliant gardeners I have ever known, is, Robin, you always worry when you start, and you worry. When you get older, you learn anything goes with anything. It doesn't quite, but I'm always very inspired by that. The espalier trees I've described, thinking of Susanna and the elders and the dirty old men getting into their cars, but I'd like just to talk about the mound. Wait a minute, here we are. Look at this. This is what the mound was made to look like in a formal garden with these 4 beds which have the royal coat of arms in the day, They had the college motto, manners maketh man, generically. There were no women at the time. I'm sure it would make them too. And you can see the impression rather like a ziggurat. My God, what are we going to do with that? Well, here's what we've got. Oh, wait a minute. Here's what we might have got. Coming. Now, this is the mound I inherited. I put the staircase up the front, narrowing, I had in mind the staircase for an Aztec sacrificial temple. And my view was that at the end of the year, the undergraduates who got bad reports would be escorted to the top for a mock condemnation to death, whilst all the fellows lined the lawn. And there was some interest in this until I proposed it at a college meeting, where the chaplain said he vetoed it absolutely. If the ceremony was to be correct, the Aztec priest had a nail driven through his penis and he wouldn't volunteer. So we've got a handrail, we've got the steps, and we've got these two, which is why I'm showing it from this side, very big home oak trees. Now, there's nothing I can do about the home oak trees. It's probably the same in America. They were seedlings, and they've been allowed to grow. They're actually quite pretty. They're completely at odds with the ziggurat I showed you before. But they all have preservation orders, and they're not allowed now to cut them. So I can't go back in any way historically. And then I began to wonder, what is this mound? And I didn't wonder in time, because a German research scholar whom I never met, it was a bit of a mistake, came to work for a day too little in our archives and wrote an excellently published article in the major journal of garden history, telling us that the mound was a military installation. Very German view. She felt it had been built up to that height in 1649 to serve as an observation post from which members of the college could stand and look away up to Headington Hill beyond during the English Civil War, when there was indeed fighting up there. Well, come on. You know, I thought this is true. I went to a garden history occasion and they all congratulated me on being in charge of a mound that was a military installation. So I went back to look at the evidence, very scatty. But there's a very good German visitor, Heinrich Stern, who came to Oxford in 1620, I remembered, and wrote a diary of his journeys. And they're very accurate. Everything he sees was there. He describes having a very large lunch, I'm sure he did, in nearby University College. And then the fellows of the university took me over to see, it was wonderful, the newly finished Parnassusberg, the Parnassus mountain built in the grounds of New College, because it is all, I'm sorry, you seem to have got stuck here. I'll go back one. Come on, you wretched thing. There we are. It's all man-made. It took 60 years, between 1590 and 50 years, and 1646. It was eventually finished, and it was an imitation of Mount Parnassus. Well, we never knew that. And then I looked into it more. There is in the Villa Medici in Rome, there is a mound that was definitely built in 1582, I discovered from the accounts, and was called the Parnassus Mountain. In the Tuileries in Paris, there had been a typical wonderful French ballet with temporary installations of Mount Parnassus with Apollo and all the muses representing the various regions of France. And Parnassus is very much in the air, the mountain with Delphi, the mountain on which Apollo plays, with all the muses of light. And I began to think that one of the fellows will have gone to Rome. I was able to identify, I think, which one, would have seen the Villa Medici, and then every night the fellows have dinner together, and I know what happens. One of them has a bee in his bonnet, and he goes on and on and on. And eventually, in order to shut him up, you vote a small sum of money and tell him to go away and act on it. And I think this guy saw it in 1583, banged on at dinner until 1590, and then the other fellows voted some money to begin, and then they couldn't stop. And they went on, and they eventually built this high mound. So what was I to do with it? Well, turn it into a staircase. It's much prettier than it looks in that picture, up which bad undergraduates could, in theory, have been taken. I was going to have inscriptions on every step, and I asked each fellow for a suitable thing to inscribe. And the man who really invented the atom bomb, Rudolf Peil, sent the equation that would destabilize the world. It was very good. However, one or two of the other fellows sent very rude remarks about each other. So I didn't feel we could go ahead with it. And the man who supported it didn't want inscriptions on the stones. We'll do it one day. But it's got a great charm now. I know it's Parnassus. It's got nothing to do with the military world. But of course, I am unable to put the big beds for reasons I'll explain below. Now, Beatrix Farrand again. If I can find her here. Yeah. One moment. We all know that education is by no means a mere matter of books, and that the aesthetic environment, does much to form the young personality. Well, maybe when you're writing to get the job, but down on the ground, how far is this true? God. I've seen them do everything, and until recently, have any of my colleagues and have any of the undergraduates had any real feel for gardening? I will give you a very few snapshots. 3 years ago, very kindly, at the beginning of the October, the beginning of the academic year, one of the Swedish tutors had a cocktail party to celebrate that we were briefly unlocked after COVID. And a brilliant historian came up to me and said, "Hello, Robin, have you had a good lockdown? Were all the flowers the right colors?" And that was his idea of gardening. Well, I mean, I have no idea. And the other day, one of them sent me a picture of an agapanthus saying, "Robin, what is this thing? I've never seen it. Is it very exotic and rare?" They have absolutely no idea, as I will explain. So in 2014, I retired. And in order they hoped to get rid of me altogether, some of them, there was a vote. I'm pleased to say 48 in favor of me going on and 2 in favor of me stopping. They reintroduced the garden committee and told me that I had to report to it. And this was an underhand way of making me realize I didn't want to go on. But all of you are responsible people. You know what the answer is, to take the wind out of people's sails by really reporting to it in such detail that they simply feel overpowered. So I wrote in great detail a list of everything that I did, and set it all out, all botanical names with absolutely no concession, assuming they all knew what they were doing. And they are now completely sweet. They are absolutely supine. Most of them have resigned, except for an absolutely brilliant professor of maths who represented Argentina in the Olympic female skating championship before she became an academic. So I feel that I'm slightly back in charge. Well, having got back in charge, we coincided with the great wave in Britain in lockdown of bossy non-gardeners trying to monopolize the air. Many people found they were locked down with a garden they'd never looked at and telling us that gardening was polluting the planet, that the only way to go, you have all this, was wilding, never to mow the lawn, and orchids would come up, and a load of absolute unconcerted drivel. So I thought, the way you do, I'm sure in your lives, we need a mission statement. And I came up with 3. I'm really rather pleased with it. It's long after the event. My mission statement was, I'll describe each bit of it: beauty, a global haven, and beauty, biodiversity, and a global haven. And I made this an item on the agenda. Oh, they were thrilled with it, absolutely delighted. And I have to say that beauty is the great joker in the pack, never allowed to be discussed in dreary left-wing English papers, let alone in academic company. The only time I've ever heard it discussed was when a very clever female applied to teach French. When she left the room, the female on the panel said rather disapprovingly, "She's very beautiful," as if there was something wrong with her. Well, I mean, she's neither right nor wrong. We wanted to tutor in French. And so you're never allowed to say something is beautiful, but that is what I'm after. I'm pursuing beauty. And then I feel this passionately. There are so many surveys of biodiversity in farms, farmlands, and so there should be. But when people come, as they come into my area, they on principle won't go into a garden because they think it has already been poisoned, destroyed, and polluted by, as if I'm spraying Agent Orange all over nature. Of course I'm not. But if I see a slug, I will kill it, put down killer to get rid of it. By that much, it won't poison a bird, but it will kill a slug. But it's beginning to change, and people are realizing, very importantly, that gardens are tremendous havens of biodiversity in every way, and not just unmown grass, but actually mown lawns. I've been working on this. If you mow grass, you get a whole range of insects underneath that you don't get if you don't mow it. You get different insects. It's an immensely complicated topic. And if the idea that is we all rewild our gardens to save nature and encourage pollinators is complete bilge. This very weekend, the mown lawn of New College will be just beginning to be surrounded by buzzing ivy bees. I don't know if you have ivy bees, but they're a new arrival in Britain. They've bred very, very fast. And in one way, they are perfect emblems of a university college. They tunnel under the grass, only under lawns, and they sleep there until July. Then, first of all, the men come out, and they buzz around the tunnels waiting, it's just like the college in October, until the women come out. And then, ditto, they try to have sex with them. If they succeed, unlike New College, they then crawl away and die, being rather pathetic men. But they go and feed on the flowers of ivy. We wouldn't have any of them if we had a no-mow policy in the college. Nothing at all is straightforward in the world of biodiversity. And again, I feel passionately about the world of a global haven. You live in a different milieu here. You have a wonderful natural flora, and very well in your gardens, you often show a lot of it. We have one of the most dreary remaining floras in the world. I mean, a few nettles and a bit of dying ivy. It really isn't very thrilling. The idea that insects will only live on native plants is absolute drivel. It's pushed endlessly by commentators with an undeclared agenda that they hate gardening. I took a young person off a course from Wheatley University nearby, and I showed him the garden, and the border was looking even more beautiful than what I've shown you. And he looked at it and said, Mr. Wilcox wouldn't like it. So I said, why is that? And he said, it's not all native plants. So I said, well, you know, these plants are very, very beautiful. They're loved by insects. And he looked at me and said, Mr. Wilcox tells us never to plant non-native plants. Well, I think Mr. Wilcox should be buried with his feet up in a pile of compost. How dreary can you be? I watched it the whole time before leaving on some of our Chinese shrubs. All the bees, the bumblebees that do all the pollination, headed straight off for a Chinese takeaway. I can't blame them. English ivy is so, so boring. So that is true. And then the global haven is indeed the role of a garden. I have things in the border that I know, or perhaps 2 or 3 other versions in cultivation now, including a wonderful hydrangea collected by Wilson, which I was given a bit and rooted, and then it was lost in the parent garden, and so we go on. Or the buddleia brought back in her sponge bag from the Great Wall of China by a superb English gardener, Esther Merton, unknown. Kew had no record of it. Very, very important. So I'm going to fast forward and catch up with some of my pictures. Hang on. Yeah. I'm just going to show you what I think Beatrix Farrand didn't necessarily do. I'm open to correction. A great apostle of native plants, but she lived in lovely America, where you have got a fantastically varied native flora in a very big continent. She would go away, I hope this is right, to look at the formal gardens of Italy and France and so forth. But I don't think she ever went in any detail to the wildflowers of the Swiss mountains or up the Alps or the Dolomites. I stand open to correction. But I cannot tell you how much I have gained by seeing not just a boring idea of turning the garden back to weeds and saying it's wilding, but by going and seeing foreign floras at their best. And I just want to share with you some truly extraordinary pictures. So extraordinary. Let's see if I've got the best one or not. No, we're coming to her in a minute. Don't worry, more coming. I went on a trip to Pakistan in the spring, and I went with the daughter of my iconic companion, Harriet Ricks, of the great botanist Martin Ricks, who for 55 years has been writing the definitive work on fritillary flowers. And he had two gaps. One of them was Fritillaria gibosa, whether it existed still, and whether its flowers were grey. And here we are in the heartland of the Taliban, absolutely amazing. We found, or rather Harriet Sharp and I saw, in company I will show, Fritillaria gibosa, not photographed ever, last reported in 1908. And that meant so much to me. It meant so much to the accompanying guard with their machine guns that two people who come to protect us from the Taliban then mounted guard, can you believe it, over the fritillary to keep it safe. Absolutely enchanting. And then I was made an honorary Baluchi citizen because we all loved each other so much. My solution to Britain is very simple. Sling out everybody who voted for Brexit and fill it with people from Pakistan. They're so much nicer. And here I am up by this very, very old juniper tree, again in the wild. And as you notice, the Mullahs have had their say, Allah Akbar, Allah is greatest. And we were on the hill, and we had been warned that there were wildlife and there were leopards. And I said to my companion, some of you may catch the poetic reference, are there any leopards here? And he said, oh yeah, on the hill behind, there are white leopards. And they come down and they scavenge in the dustbins just behind the tree. Maybe some of you remember T.S. Eliot in The Waste Land. Lady, 3 white leopards sat under a juniper tree. And maybe you remember that when he went back to Harvard and read his poem, a lady put her hand up and said, Mr. Eliot, what does the line mean? 3 white leopards sat under a juniper tree. And with singular unhelpfulness, he replied, Madam, it means 3 white leopards sat under a juniper tree. Well, my answer is they don't. Well, 3 white leopards scavenge behind a juniper tree, and Eliot, you got it wrong. But you only see that if you go out into the wild, as I love doing. Now, I will come back to them. The major problem I have, of course, is that I'm not the only person who has to look after the garden. And here I differ from Beatrix. So far, I have differed on a series of points. She would understand completely that a plan with a planting plan is merely a little dot on the motorway of achievement. Everything changes, of course, and she exemplified that. I think I've shown that. Secondly, she never had to deal with a committee. Thirdly, she never really had to worry about going back through 500 years of history because the American colleges were all obviously rather younger. But fourthly, she writes of how it is essential that the quadrangles and courts shall be kept as havens of quiet and calm, which they are. And it wouldn't be appropriate to plant shrubs because it would make for too much diversion from the hard work of study going on behind. What world were you living in, Beatrix? I have to share the college, which I therefore call the Kissing Fields, with others. Here we are preparing in front of what she would hate, but is so beautiful, Magnolia Soulangeana, planted against the chapel by my predecessor. She hated trees against buildings. People come from far and wide to film it now. The mantra of the RHS in England has started from Beth Chatto, right plant, right place is drivel. Who knows what's right? You never would have planted a magnolia tree there. It's the most beautiful thing in the college. Solanum jasminoides album. And here is the beginning of the great commemoration ball. All know us, or a couple is dancing away in honor of starting the ball. And NB, the red carpet. I really know how to protect a garden when it's at risk. This is our big circular lawn when you come in, provided you put down very thin carpet everywhere, especially if it's red, because, you know, despite their cynicism, the British are absolutely mad for celebrity. They all love dancing on the red carpet and they don't do any damage anywhere else. The night goes on, and you're then in front of my mind, you have this ghastly kind of pavilion where a rock band belts it out all night and everybody gets increasingly excited, and then time goes on. And you see how the environment is so much a part of education. And I, of course, do have another slide, which I'm not prepared. to show. So I'm going to end with a tribute to the generations of people whom I've taught. And it begins by being rather a wistful tribute. Very occasionally, never as a systematic act of bullying, I would ask the young who were sitting on my sofa discussing the deep problems of whether we know anything about the philosopher Socrates. I would say to them in March before they went away for the spring holidays, do you know what a primrose looks like? And I gave up asking occasionally, I would say that, possibly because I rather liked them. None of them knew. One boy from Northern Ireland did say, yeah, I know, it flowers in spring. I thought, wonderful. And then he said, you know, it's big round flowers, they're purple. And I thought, God. And then I really dropped the question because a very, very sharp, foxy young lady with steely eyes looked at me, squirmed down into the cushions and said, that's a really pedantic question. I see the same flowers as you do, but you just put academic names on them. Ah, she'd already got a job in Goldman Sachs. So off I went, and I went to lunch and thought, actually, the interesting question there, if you can name something, do you know it better? I do believe that. You can distinguish more if you can put names on. And I was sitting next to one of the great philosophers of the world, very, very famous. I thought, I'll ask him. And he looked a bit agonized and said, no, descriptive names or identifiers, and got into a bit of a muddle. And as we were finishing lunch, he said to me, there's something I have to say. So I said, what's that? He said, I don't know what a primrose looks like either. God. So a week later, the primroses flowered. And I got him by the scruff of his Macintosh, one of the cleverest men in the world. And I took him out and I picked a primrose and I gave it to him. And he looked at it and said, so that is it. Right. I thought, between you and me, there is a gulf unbridgeable. You're far more brilliant than I am, but you miss half the world. But then I got an immortal thank you. A short paper he had written called Fuzzy Logic. Fuzzy logic is related to the problem of conversation, where you are discussing something which actually one of you doesn't really know what it is. And yet somehow you manage to keep the conversation going. How can this be when logic requires you to have an exact sense of the reference and so on? So that was all incredibly clever. It was a very difficult paper with a lot of formal notes. And he then said, it may be clearer if I give an example. So I thought, I bet it will be. And he said, it may be clearer if I give an example. We need something which I do not know about, and you may. Okay. So I turned over the page and the first sentence said, suppose I talk to you about a beech tree. I thought, oh, Lord, oh heavens, it's not just you don't know about primroses, but you don't even know what a beech tree looks like. What sort of world am I living in? And I do ask myself that. But it started a bit to change. I hope. No, there we are. For the first time ever this spring, I took a popular request, a group of initially 24 undergraduates around the college to describe what we were doing. They had the time of their lives. I tell them scandals so great I couldn't mention them here, and they absolutely loved it. They couldn't have been keener. Those who came from China and Hong Kong were only interested when the plants were Chinese. Very interesting, slightly worrying. And at the end, I said, well, would any of you like to come and I will give you a raise? And a certain group of them did. Wonderful. These are all really keen gardeners. On my far side, two ladies, Anya from New York State and Grace from Birmingham. They are really serious gardeners. How lovely. So I picked pink roses, Jacques Cartier, and gave them to them, Comte de Chambord. And they put them spontaneously in their hair and in my hair. And then they found another lady who was lying in a bikini on the lawn to take a picture, which she did, this picture. And then they wrote to me the next morning saying, we're so pleased with the picture, we're going to put it on the college website. So they did. Wonderful. And I feel for the first time they knew what a primrose was, they knew about sweet peas, they knew about Deutzia, they didn't know Deutzia Montbéliard that I showed them. I felt there's some hope. What a marvelous picture. And at lunchtime, I was taken on one side by the chaplain saying, Robin, I did expect better of you. You really can't put pictures of undergraduates on the website when you put roses in their hair. And I groaned and said, look, they put the roses of their own accord in their own hair, and they asked for the picture to be taken. So one motto is fight the drabbies. Right, then I have two more mottos. I've gardened on the killing fields, I'm ending, for 30 years or more. One thing suggests another, yeah, because it usually dies. We had a catastrophic winter. I hang on in there cultivating Arnebia, Echioides, and Campanula zoisii. These are not easy. They're my pride and joy. They're probably 2 inches big. When they flower, is it beauty? What is it? It's biodiversity, that these extraordinary things, one of them the plant which Satan implanted his blackness of his fingers in the Saudi Arabian desert, and Muhammad, we are told, whisked his cloak. Satan said, but I can change the world, you see, Muhammad. And Muhammad said, no, not forever. And the black spots fade as the flower ages. That means as much to me as the whole of my garden. And I sit out at night. I'm not exactly a religious person, but I sit and I contemplate. Very important to sit still and look in a garden as the light goes. And I look around and I do really feel it's about 2 acres big. I know many of you have the same feeling, and how often Beatrix must have had it. I think I've planted everything. And after a bit, I think right back to our ancestor, Adam. Now you all know the phrase alpha male. I've decided that Adam was an omega male. What a drip. He didn't plant a single thing. He never had to pull out a weed. God had arranged it all. It flowered beautifully. Eve was running around with no clothes on. And according at least to St. Augustine, he had no hesitation. He immediately scored with each other persistently near the flowers. It was a dreamy life, and he did nothing. What a useless creature. And I will say quite often, back in your hole, Adam, and I feel I am better than him. But I also feel something else, which I'm going to end with, if I can find it. In the early 17th century, the metaphysical writer and poet Thomas Traherne, completely forgotten until his works were found again on a book trolley in, I think, the 1920s. What a marvelous writer. And he says, when I came into the country as a young man, and being seated among the silent trees, the meadows, and the hills, before me stretched all my life in my own hands. And I resolved to spend it all, whatever it cost me, away from the city in search of happiness. It's I'm absolutely, yeah. I'm incredibly happy to take questions, but I'm so sorry. In the rush, I've just gone on for hearing aids and I've left them behind, so I have to begin with a warning. I agreed to take questions at something called the Weekend FT Festival, which is very enjoyable in London. And I hadn't really realized how bad my hearing was. And the first very punchy question from a woman about 6 rows back, I thought began, the last time I met you, I had syphilis. Absolutely. Anything is possible with the Weekend FT reader. And I said, to the horror of the editor standing nearby, I said, well, I'm so sorry, but I thought that penicillin still worked. So he ran up to me and said, no, Robin, what she said was, the last time we met, I think it was at Amphipolis. That is a city in Greece. So I will do my absolute best, but Scott is going to be very kind. And if you have a question, it can be about absolutely anything, including why I'm such a bore. Scott will interpret for you, but just what a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Any questions?
Lovely. Yeah, lovely. Wonderful. Oh, you've got a microphone. It still won't help.
I think your new college is misnamed. I think it's much older than any American university. Is it not?
Right. But you raise a very interesting point. No, it's not the oldest, and it hasn't been understood why it is new. It was founded in 1379 by William of Wykeham, the very corrupt archbishop who also founded Winchester College, the school of Rishi Sunak. But nonetheless, we're still going. We were called new for this reason. We are the new college of the Blessed Virgin Mary. And in 1379, there was another college already of the Blessed Virgin Mary, Oriel College, infinitely less distinguished. So we call ourselves the New College of the Virgin. And because Oriel still exists, we call ourselves still New College. That is the reason. But it has, as you're absolutely right, it has, as you can see, 600 and nearly 30 years of garden history behind it. I can't start going back to some artificial point in 1730 as if I'm somehow restoring the garden. That is the wrong way to think. And then I'd say on the other side, I think you'd all agree, I don't like the practice that some so-called designers have introduced of lush exotic banana tree leaves and castor oil plants against medieval architecture. I'm so pleased you're wincing. They read the great Christopher Lloyd. Of course, if I gave you a talk on Christopher Lloyd and me, you really would laugh. Obviously a great gardener, and he rather celebrated exotic planting, which you see very well, by the way, absolutely brilliantly at Chanticleer in Philadelphia, one of my favorite gardens in the world. It's completely wrong against medieval stonework, but they've read about it in one of Christopher's columns. They put it in the wrong place. You have to think critically. There was a question in the front.
Thank you so much. What a fantastic lecture. Just curious, I didn't get the name of the 17th century, who you referred to, the 17th century Thomas something.
Oh yeah, okay, of course, sorry.
Seated among the silent trees.
Yeah.
It was so beautiful. I'd just like to know the reference.
Thomas Traherne, Traherne. Maybe some of you have very strong Christian faith, and even if you don't, or did have it once, Traherne is really worth reading. And he spent part of his time in Herefordshire, but he had, of course, been educated, I'm afraid, I think I'm right, in Cambridge, but it's very powerfully written, Traherne, and that's from one of the meditations, I think number 2. It's very, very touching. And he has an unusual view of the afterlife and the resurrection. Read more, there's a wonderful thing in Stendhal's Rouge et Noir, where the young Julien falls in love wickedly with his employer's wife, and they hold hands under the lime trees, and with infinite brilliant cattiness, Stendhal says, and so they fell in love, or so they thought, but their love was rather boring because they read nothing. Absolutely wonderful. We don't have enough of that. Read English literature and become a good lover. People don't say that. Could you fall in love with an organic chemist? You probably have. Actually, that could be very interesting too. I don't know. Any Zoom questions? No, we're good. So, any other questions? You can all come and see New College Garden. The time to come is early June, and I'm going to end just by doing very quickly. I'll give you about 8 gardens off the top of my head that's really worth seeing. You wouldn't otherwise know. Would that be popular? I'll just choose them irrespective. I've mentioned this, I think, to Martha when I was very much enjoying a cheese twist and a picture of her in that swimsuit. Well, obviously, Edinburgh Botanic Garden and everything related to it. That's the place to begin. One, I mean, completely marvelous. Logan and all the rest. Coming down, Newby Hall, Newby Hall. Absolutely brilliant. I'm not going to include parks. I will include my family one, Bramham Park, and I went. Then I would go to Shropshire, Woolerton, Wolleller, I think I mean Ton Hall, Wollerton Old Hall in Shropshire. Leslie Jenkin, the art teacher, and her husband who work for the local council, absolutely brilliant, though they're getting old. Truly, truly marvelous. I would go to Coton, C-O-T-O-N Manor. They're all open, these places. Coton Manor in Northamptonshire, one woman's masterpiece, brilliant in September. Definitely see that. Naturally, New College, Oxford. Don't waste your money on the Botanic Garden, it's going backwards. You can also see our tree connected with Harry Potter, the most valuable tree in the world. We had the Harry Potter film, and we now get 75,000 visitors a year, many of them to take pictures in front of the tree. I would go to Kiftsgate, of course, Kiftsgate. I would say to you, not for repeating, but it's widely known, that the National Trust has rather ruined Hidcote, though you'll never be able to ruin the brilliant Lawrence Johnson American central vista and the side views. The planting is all over the place, and you're not allowed to walk up the main views at the moment. And they sacked all the gardeners temporarily during lockdown. It's a disgrace. So I don't really myself rate that. But those are ones I would put very, very high up. Obviously, Great Dixter. I'm afraid, please don't repeat it. But I have to say the same is true at the moment of Sissinghurst, which is going backwards. It needs a very firm grip. And people are saying, well, it's time to move on beyond Vita Sackville West. What are they talking about? You know, it's like when I go to the Royal Shakespeare Company and they put on a play by Shakespeare and they've written an extra scene, just, you know, or put in 2 black characters who aren't in the play. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm not paying for that. And they call it, you know, I discovered, I never knew it, that King Lear had an entirely black entourage in Britain in 850 BC. Well, it's distracting. It's nothing to do with the skill of the actors, who of course are brilliant, fantastic Othellos and other parts. It's just plain bloody stupid. And as for King Lear as a woman, don't ask me. Right, and then I would certainly go down where I've just been down to Devon. Really, really good. Man Keith Wiley, W-I-L-E-Y. There are 2 gardens here. One is called Wildside. It really is an inspiring version of a wild planting. The man is known to be a genius. He is. And where he worked before is not as good because he left, because they were not helpful to him. The garden house at Buckland. Those would definitely be absolute must-see places. And then when you're over for Chelsea Flower Show or a bit before, the greatest display, hardly believable, of azaleas, rhododendrons and bluebells in a wood is at Bowood House, B-O-W-W-O-O-D House, in the rhododendron garden. There's a lovely lake by Capability Brown. This is one of the miracles. An oak tree canopy, no conifers, and swathes of rhododendrons planted since 1860. And even great botanists are not sure what they all are. So beautiful. Whatever you may feel about rhodos, go there before you express an opinion. Absolutely stunning in every way. And that's just, if I could say, a small sample. There are many, many others. My heart lies with those who are doing the gardening. I believe in the ing, as I do with just about everything except watching really, really competitive steeplechase horse racing. I've ridden in a horse race, but I couldn't ride in the Grand National. I'll watch that with pleasure. And I'll certainly watch cricket with pleasure. I don't want to bat against Australia nowadays. But otherwise, I'd far rather do it than watch it. And I recommend that in life. Never say no. And then if I were going out to France in Normandy, look fairly near Rouen for the Jardin Plume, Jardin Plume. Absolutely brilliant. Again, Patrice, employed by the local road maintainers, nothing special. Very, very clever take on a wild but formal garden. Brilliantly done with his wonderful wife, Sylvie. Long may it last. In Paris, go to Bagatelle. Absolutely superb. And then Italy, I've hardly begun. And in Greece, really good. Look for Kaiseriani on Mount Hymettus near Athens with the fabulous Sophia. And again, I've hardly begun there. Wherever you go, there are places, there are gardens. There certainly are. Even in Pakistan, wonderful. I went to the Karachi Flower Show. Completely superb. far better than Chelsea Flower Show. Women in burqas fighting over the best orchids to get them, and marvelous exhibits. Huge, huge thing. Been running since 1947. Never mentioned before. So uplifting and heartening. Really, really wonderful thing to see. So that's just a few ideas. Is that any help? I'd never joined a tour or a group. They're all awful. They charge you far too much. You can perfectly easily just get in the country, get on a train and see it yourself. No. But I really hope you do. But I tell people to go to Philadelphia. I mean, obviously, Chanticleer, phenomenal. Longwood, phenomenal. If I had only a week to live, that's where I would go now. And again, the arboretums, superb. The great thing about gardening is it acknowledges no barriers of class, ethnicity, or background at home. It's present suddenly everywhere. And in Romania, I met a gypsy with her hair done up in a scarf, pair of earrings, and she grew tuberose in her back garden. I've never seen such brilliant tuberose, but she just could do it. That's the wonderful thing about it. Okay, I write for the Financial Times, and okay, I was an Etonian. Yes, a lot of money's been spent on me. Yes, I had a gardener in the family. We employed a gardener, but that isn't why the thunderbolt of love of gardening hit me. It strikes at random, yeah, and there you are. But you have to work at it. So all of the, rubbish about, oh, it's only for the rich. Oh, what are people talking about? Nonsense. And I went to a French friend's grandmother's garden, and I looked out, and it was marvelous, quite small, entirely vegetables, and it was so beautiful. I said, oh, it's so lovely. I can't think why I said to him, why do you do it? Because she was 80. She looked at me and said very simply, je le mange, I eat it. Perfect, completely agree with her. Okay, but a well-loved garden, I'm not totally sympathetic, romantic, quite badly so, but not totally. A well-loved garden where somebody is doing their best has got a quality to it that even the best will in the world, a public garden can never have. I don't know what it is, and my heart's lies with the former. But there are many ways of gardening. Okay, I'm so sorry, I'll stop.
So now I would like to present the Beatrix Farrand Society Achievement Award. The Achievement Award honors a living person whose life work, including exhibiting the qualities of talent, vision, and commitment, has consistently and significantly contributed to humanity and to the environment through the art of landscape architecture, design, or the natural sciences. Past recipients of this award include Laurie Olin, Elizabeth Barlow Rogers, Adam Greenspan, Thomas Volz, Pete Udolph, Dan Pearson, and now it's an honor to give it to Robin Lane Fox. So the medallion actually was inspired by the medallions that would hang between columns in a Roman garden, and but also on it, okay, is the same psalm that is over the lintel at Garland Farm and was over the lintel of the library at Reef Point, and it has been a source of endless speculation for what it really means, because it's Latin, but then it also could be Vulgate, and it's King James Bible, and it could be it's just, there are lots of interpretations. So since we happen to have a scholar in the house, Robin, would you please explain to us what you think Beatrix Farrand was thinking when she said, intellectum da mihi e vihum?
Okay. Thank you so much for this. Intellectum da mihi, grant me understanding, not intelligence. Grant me understanding, et vivam, and I will live. I think two things. This is from the Latin Vulgate translation of Psalm 118 or 19, depending how you count. 119 is the usual one. It's a very, very long psalm. I'm very grateful to Scott and all of you for the impetus to reread it, where the psalmist is speaking up for the law and what the law of the Lord means, the law, the testimony, and the rules of the Lord. Clearly in a world where other people are saying, oh, it's a load of rubbish, you don't have to believe that stuff. And he is celebrating the existence of the law and asking for understanding that I may live. Now, in the Hebrew, that's what tips it. Intellectum means understanding. Grant me understanding. One would tend to translate it in order that I may live. And I look back and in Greek, it was indeed taken, grant me understanding that I may live. And one Latin translation was be intellectum da mihi ut vivam. And there are variants that say that, but the dominant Vulgate went for et vivam, which is rather lovely. Yep. Give me understanding and I will live, rather than give me understanding in order that I may live. And I prefer the Latin version. And what a wonderful thing. It really could be inscribed in, well, scratched on the back of my medal. It's one of the principles of my life. I'm sure of yours. Yeah. I'm so sorry. How wonderful. It's on your medal. It's on the medal. What a lovely thing. I'll bring it to choose it. Beatrix Farrand chose it. It's a very striking song. It's really worth reading.
So now we will, Martha, once again, thank you for the use of the church. And now I'd like to special thanks because Martha has prepared refreshments for us. And I actually had a little nibble this afternoon, and I can tell you that they're delicious. Absolutely, memorably delicious. So please help yourself. And